Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, battling ballot misinformation. Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver tells us what President Biden dropping out of the race means and doesn't mean for New Mexico voters. And
it kind of makes sense that courts do interpret the law. The problem is that complexity that comes with issues, in particular my arena of environmental protection.
Hope amid the darkness. Our Land's Laura Paskus asks a longtime environmental attorney how people can advocate for clean air and water even as the Supreme Court slashes protections. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm executive producer Jeff Proctor. We have a packed show. Eric Schlenker-Goodrich of the Western Environmental Law Center talks with Our Land senior producer Laura Paskus about the troubling politics of protecting our air, land, and water, and why there's still hope. In less than 30 minutes, I sit down with Peter Simonson to discuss how civil rights and liberties have shifted in the state and the nation during his 24 years as executive director at the ACLU of New Mexico. And in the second half of today's show, senior producer Lou DeVizio speaks with the acting director of the state's Office of Broadband and Expansion about a years-long project to connect every public school in New Mexico to high-speed internet. But first, we turn our attention to this fall's general election. Since President Joe Biden dropped out of the race last weekend, the internet has been awash in misinformation about how Biden's withdrawal and subsequent endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris will affect the November ballot. Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse-Oliver joins us virtually this week to clear some things up, including a breakdown of what will happen to Biden's pledged delegates from New Mexico's June primary and how best to verify information about voting during what promises to be a chaotic election cycle. Maggie, thank you for being with me on New Mexico in Focus this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff.
So, President Joe Biden won the New Mexico Democratic primary in June, then dropped out of the race last weekend. That means his name won't be on the ballot in November, and that means Donald Trump automatically wins New Mexico, right?
No, that isn't how it's going to go. What folks don't necessarily realize is that, primary elections are nominations. And so, yes, Democrats in New Mexico voted in June in the primary election with Joe Biden's name at the top of the ticket. However, that vote, I think, much like the Electoral College and the general election, folks don't really realize that vote is to allocate delegates to the Democratic National Convention. The Democratic National Convention, which occurs next month in August, is when the ballot will be finalized for all 50 states, including New Mexico, in terms of which candidate is going to be the presidential candidate. And so as we've seen these last several days, President Biden has declined to continue his campaign, has endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. She immediately went about trying to get those delegates that had been pledged to President Biden for her campaign for president. And as we all know, within a very quick amount of time, had enough pledged delegates at the convention to secure the nomination. She is the likely nominee, but won't officially be the nominee until the completion of the Democratic National Convention.
Okay, and I want to unpack that in just a second, but to clear up one more thing, obviously I was joking to start the interview, but your office, Maggie, correct me if I'm wrong, your office does not need to fire up the polls and hold another primary election, right?
No, in fact, there's no provision for that in state law, but more importantly, there's no need for that because, again, this is a nomination process. And we haven't really seen this issue at the national level very often. I think the last time we saw something like this happen was in the 60s when, then sort of likely nominee Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was sadly assassinated and was ultimately replaced on the ballot by the Democratic National Convention. But here in New Mexico, many candidates who have sought a primary election nomination and won have then withdrawn after the primary election. And we do a mini version of that at the state level, where either the statewide Central Committee for the Democratic or Republican Party or the local, those members from that district get together and choose a nominee. In fact, we just had that happen with Senator Saya Correa Hemphill from Silver City, who withdrew after the primary election, and the local Central Committee members for the state Democratic Party from that district have selected a replacement candidate.
Gotcha. So where are y'all seeing some of these wild interpretations about where and how elections work?
Sadly, for years, we have been seeing just a tremendous amount of disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation about how the election process works. It was really, prevalent in 2020, and it's only grown incrementally. And now we're seeing it in such a huge wave, of course, in this presidential election year, all over social media, primarily. And so unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of folks get their information from social media. A lot of that information is factual, but a lot of it isn't. And so right away on Sunday, when we all heard that President Biden was withdrawing from the race, immediately we saw memes circulating around saying, these are the states that are past the ballot deadline, and New Mexico is included on that list. And I thought, oh, no, we need to get the factual information out there.
When is the ballot deadline, Maggie, for the record?
It's August 27th. So, there's plenty of time, for the Democrats to hold their convention and for them to certify that new nominee to our office.
Okay. We've known each other for a long time, and it seems to me that your job used to be simpler, if not easier. Most of what you did as Bernalillo County Clerk and now as Secretary of State was to administer elections. It seems that these days you spend a fair amount of time having conversations like this, in which you have to beat back some of the mis and disinformation that you just talked about. From your perspective, when and why did that really start to shift?
Well, as you'll remember, Jeff, from back in the days when I was a county clerk and you were at the Albuquerque Journal, there have always been rumors about election administration, and that we've, occasionally had to quash. Back then it was a handful of folks. Generally speaking, when rumors or problems arose, we were able to get the information out, the correct information pretty quickly to quash those rumors. Folks who continue to believe them, those were sort of like the bleeding edges on either side, depending on what the issue was that was being raised. Now such a tremendous percentage of the populace has been told for years to distrust our election process, and has been fed so many lies and so much misinformation about the process that we're at a point where, for those individuals who are so convinced, there's literally nothing we can show them or demonstrate to them that will change their mind. And so, I've always felt as an election administrator that my job is not just to run elections, but to make sure that public has accurate information, that there's a dialogue in civics and the voting process. I do feel like that is one of my roles. But to your point, it has become such a prevalent part of my job that I probably do, I think, spend the vast majority of my time and energy having these conversations to let people know, look, the reality is that there are people out there that want to sow seeds of doubt in the process, hoping that maybe the public will get so discouraged that they may not even participate. And that's truly unfortunate. That's not our democratic system. So it's incumbent upon me and my fellow election officials here in New Mexico and across the country to make sure that folks know where to get trusted and accurate information. And I'll say it right now, anybody who has a question about where, when, and how they can vote, or how an election process works, don't go anywhere else but your Secretary of State or your local county clerk's office. That's where you are going to get that trusted, accurate information.
Maggie, you just answered my last question. I really, really appreciate the solid information and the conversation as always. Thanks for helping people not be led astray on election day.
And thank you so much, Jeff, too.
Thanks.
I would say that's probably been the major change for us, is seeing how the federal courts have become such a difficult place to pursue civil rights claims, either on an individual basis or on a more systemic basis, and now looking to the state courts to try to take over some of that role.
Everyone likes having clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. Yet, bedrock environmental laws and regulations are continuously being eroded in the United States. This week, Our Land senior producer Laura Paskus talked with Western Environmental Law Center Executive Director Eric Schenkler Goodrich about a recent blow the Supreme Court dealt to environmental oversight. They also talk about Project 2025 and look ahead to the upcoming presidential election. And you'll want to stay tuned for this. They talk about optimism and the agency people have to change the course of history and to build a better world together.
Eric, welcome. Thanks for being here again.
My pleasure.
So in June, the Supreme Court struck down the Chevron doctrine. First to start, what was that?
Chevron doctrine is a 40-year-old precedent that no longer exists. And Chevron doesn't refer really to the oil and gas company. It refers to a judicial doctrine. And that judicial doctrine stands for a basic proposition that when Congress passes a law and courts are interpreting that law, they will defer to an agency interpretation and application of that law. If there's any kind of ambiguity, or if the law is structured in a way to address complexity in the world, for example, climate change or air quality regulation or worker safety, public health protection. And it's basically the idea that courts are not well situated to work through very complex technical issues. And so we should rely on administrative agencies who have scientists and economists and other technical experts and lawyers and really understand what their mission is in the world so that they can meet the public interest. Okay. And with the Chevron doctrine is now no longer in existence because of a recent Supreme Court decision, Loper Bright and Relentless, actually two cases that were consolidated. And what the court did is it overturned that 40 years of precedent, and it basically said courts will interpret the law.
So how does that play out for environmental issues, and maybe specifically here in New Mexico?
Yeah, at one level, when you think about Loper Bright and Relentless, these two decisions, it kind of makes sense that courts do interpret the law. The problem is that complexity that comes with issues, in particular my arena of environmental protection. And what Chevron was the Chevron doctrine was basically saying, well, we interpret the law, but we understand that there are these complexities in the world, so therefore we're going to defer to the agencies. So the courts were exercising that judicial authority. The challenge now is that courts are usurping that authority and aggregating power to themselves to decide how laws should be applied. With environmental laws, this is particularly important because the bedrock environmental laws that our country relies on that are very relevant to New Mexico, you think about the Clean Water Act in particular, the Clean Air Act, National Environmental Policy Act. These laws were passed in the 1970s with a recognition that we don't know everything right now. But we do know that there are problems in the world, and we have to do a better job balancing economic interests with public health, environmental interests. And so we're going to give the agencies lots of authority. What the Supreme Court has said is we don't really like that. It is the imposition of ideology and usurping power, not just from the executive branch, but from Congress, because they're basically saying all those capacious laws, those expansive, big visionary laws, we don't really like them. And so we're going to hem in on that authority, and then we're going to impose our subjective judgment about what these laws mean and what their implications are to the world around us. What are the values of the right-wing Supreme Court? It's the elevation of economic interests over the public interest. And that's the fundamental thing to understand here. There's a lot of legal nuance here. There's a lot of legal subtext. Ultimately, Loper Bright, Relentless, the Supreme Court's action, it's a function of power, not so much of legal analysis and interpretation from, say, an objective lawyerly perspective.
Right. So, okay, so it's as bad as I thought.
It's very bad. When you take a look at the legal reasoning, there's arguments that say, well, what the court is doing here is they're just making sure that, hey, we're the ones who have the expertise on understanding what the words in a particular law means. The challenge is you have facts, and courts are not well situated to resolve those facts. Agencies are. So you take a situation like water quality protection. How do you protect water quality? How do you protect ephemeral streams? How do you protect playa lakes? How do you ensure that pollution doesn't harm fish? How do you ensure that it doesn't harm people who swim in the water? Courts aren't well situated to deal with that. And so now what you have is courts, very frankly, I think, saying that, well, no, this is our power. But when you look at that exercise of power, again, it is elevating those economic interests. So I think what happens ultimately is this comes at the expense of the public interest. Mm-hmm. And that will cause grave harm to New Mexico across all arenas, from public health and safety to environmental protection to climate action, worker safety.
Yeah. So speaking of power, we've got a presidential election coming up. You and I are talking on Wednesday. This will air on Friday. Who knows? The way things are moving so fast. But what's at stake in a presidential election when it comes to the environment and climate action in particular?
An immense amount. So when you think about climate action specifically, during the Biden administration, the Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate investment by a country in the history of the world. Mm-hmm. The next administration will have considerable authority on what are the contours of how that is implemented, how effective it will be. It's very clear to me that Kamala Harris is very much pro-climate action and Donald Trump is very much anti-climate action. And so that executive authority allows them to either subvert the law or to amplify the law through their executive power. Now, with the Supreme Court in place, that's something critical to keep in mind, because it's very likely that the next president will choose justices to the Supreme Court. They're elderly people. And so sometimes they get ill. Sometimes they decide to step aside. So with the next administration, that next president will likely choose new Supreme Court justices. So the court's structure and power and how they think about the world, that is also very much on the agenda, and something that I hope voters really think about very, very carefully. And stepping back to the Loper-Bright decision and the overturning of Chevron, I think that what I've seen as a legal practitioner, as somebody who's litigated for a quarter century, I approach this with the values of we need to elevate the public interest, not purely economic interest. Of course, economics are part of the public interest. But we need to think about the Supreme Court, because the justices on the Supreme Court, I don't think they're conservative. I think they're right-wing ideologues, the majority that's on the court, particularly when you think of folks like Justice Thomas and Justice Alito. Justice Thomas in particular, as ProPublica has very well documented, is ethically compromised, hangs out with billionaires like Harlan Crow, Koch brothers, Leonard Leo, of the Federalist Society. Like, these are folks that are actively trying to engineer society through their vision and through their values. And that's very much a right-wing vision. It is not a conservative vision, in my opinion.
Yeah. So speaking of that right-wing vision, the Heritage Foundation has released in the past this Project 2025, which is a mandate for conservative leadership. It's like 600 or 900 pages long. 900 pages long. There is a lot for alarm within that document. Anything in particular on the environment that jumps out at you in terms of a vision for the future?
Just as broad context, this is sort of it's a fantasy for right-wing thinkers, legal shops, like the Heritage Foundation, to remake society and to remake government in particular, reallocating how power actually works in our country, the relationship between the branches of government. With the environment, what I would highlight is public lands, where what they want to do is essentially open up public lands to extractive interest. A lot of public lands are already open to extractive interest. It's very much out of balance. There's a lot of reckless, irresponsible development that is already occurring. they would amplify that reckless development. They would basically take public lands, which ostensibly are stewarded for the benefit of all of us, for you, for me, for all of our listeners today. And they would say, no, we're going to elevate the power of extractive companies, hard rock mining companies, oil and gas companies, folks who are extracting value from public lands rather than stewarding and conserving public lands. So I think that is a very dangerous thing. And I think when you look at the polling, Westerners are very much in favor of protecting public lands. Why? Because they're one of the reasons we live here. We love our public lands. I live in northern New Mexico, place that I love and adore. You think of the Rio Grande del Norte National Monument or the Valle Vidal. Like, those are places that Project 2025 would try to put on the chopping block. Whether they succeed or not is contingent on what voters choose in November.
Yeah. So Project 2025, anybody can read that online. It's like this big, sweeping, detailed document. I'm curious, though, what about the conversations that happen behind closed doors that we're not hearing about? Do you think all the strategies are out there for environmental degradation and deregulation, or are there other things that we need to worry about that maybe don't make the headlines or the internet?
There is a lot of active work behind the scenes, basically amongst anybody who's engaged in politics or anybody who's engaged in advocacy right now. We live in this world right now where 2025, there are two pathways. There's one where Kamala Harris is the president of the United States and one where Donald Trump is. And everybody's trying to understand what are the implications depending upon that choice that voters make. What I would say relative to right-wing interests is that in the first Trump administration, I don't think there was an expectation that Trump would win. And so they were caught very flat-footed when suddenly they realized, oh, we won. What do we do now? That is not the situation with this November. The Project 2025 very much is the blueprint for what a next Republican administration would do. President Trump has tried to disassociate himself from Project 2025. Heritage Foundation isn't part of the campaign, but then at the same time, that document was written by various folks who will likely populate a Trump administration. So I think it's very fair to say that Project 2025 is that right-wing blueprint. It is very well developed, and they will run with it from day one.
Yeah. So I, like you, we've been working on these issues for a long time, and I have friends who help me find hope and giving me books like this. I don't know if you've read this, All That We Can Save, but I was reading it, and there's a chapter called Litigating in a Time of Crisis that actually made me think of you. And Abigail Dillon starts her essay, watching climate change progress is like living in a dream where running is required, but the reflexes are gone. Even as life goes on in familiar ways, the familiar has become unreliable. I'm wondering if that resonates with you at all.
It does. Abby's a friend of mine. I know her well. She's the president of Earth Justice. We've talked frequently. It does. In a weird way, I feel a lot of positivity in this moment. I feel very energized. There is a dynamic of having the privilege and the honor of living at this moment in the world and having a sense of agency that I can change the course of history. The team that I work with at the Western Environmental Law Center, we've had immense demonstrated success. I think in terms of positivity, in terms of hope, the litigation that we did in Montana on behalf of Montana youth in the Held v. Montana trial, where we established in Montana a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, that's fantastic. And that's kids rising to the occasion and rising into leadership levels to change the course of history. So I would encourage folks to think about what kind of agency they have as individuals, how they show up in the world, and to contribute to the course of history. We all have agency in that situation, whether it's simply going to the voting booth, whether it's doing what I do professionally, where I have this privilege of leading a public interest environmental advocacy organization, whether you're a reporter who can look into and dig deep into these issues and understands how it impacts people. I almost think Bill McKibben, I think, had a famous line, and I'm paraphrasing it slightly, like, I don't have time to be discouraged or to worry about hope. There is simply too much to do. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, is to lean into what they can do and to foster a sense of belonging amongst people, so that we have a shared sense of identity, that we have a shared sense of the trajectory of how we want to think about our communities, how we want to think about our relationship to each other, to our government, and to the world around us. I find a lot of hope in thinking about that agency and how we foster a sense of belonging with each other.
Yeah.
We refer to it internally at my organization as an ecology of kinship. And so thinking about how we advance strategies that, we do a lot of very wonky technical and policy work. We do litigation on behalf of, nearly 200 organizations. Ultimately, what we think about is how do we foster an ecology of kinship, which is good, right, healthy relationships with each other and the world around us.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming in today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
So anything else, the pandemic showed us how integral the internet is into our daily lives and where technology is taking us. So, a lot of discussions happen around the Internet of Things. Our refrigerators, our stoves are now connected to the internet. We have, increasing number of devices in our pockets, in our homes that are getting there, as well as in the schools.
That interview with Drew Lovelace will air in less than 20 minutes. Peter Simonson, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Mexico, has seen a whirlwind of changes since he began his career at the nonprofit nearly a quarter century ago. Over the last 2 decades as a journalist, I've had countless conversations with Peter about civil rights and liberties in New Mexico and across the country. This week, we took that conversation to the studio. In the first of a 2-part interview, Peter looks back at the early days of his career, and I ask him about the challenges still facing Albuquerque and New Mexico as his organization and others work to ensure that the Constitution is more than just words on an old piece of parchment. Peter, thank you so much for joining me on New Mexico in Focus.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You started at the ACLU of New Mexico a little less than 24 years ago. So I'd like to begin by asking, what were the big issues driving the advocacy work of the organization in those first few years for you?
Well, for me, just that first year was just learning how to do the job. And it wasn't all that long after that, of course, September 11th happened. The world changed, our organization changed. I remember we had a new executive director at the national office who was still our executive director, Anthony Romero. And, all those folks at the national office were working from their homes, trying to figure out how they maintained the organization and helped us affiliates, our state affiliates, respond to the situation that was unfolding, A lot of the work then was just educating the public about the threats that the USA Patriot Act represented, and then the Homeland Security Act after that, and then the various pieces of legislation around electronic surveillance. So much of the country was so focused on the national scene, and not just, of course, the sort of surveillance questions that were happening in the country itself, but then everything that was happening overseas, and the breaking of the news that there was this torture program in overseas prisons like Abu Ghraib, and so
black sites, CIA black sites.
Exactly. Yeah. And the ACLU was instrumental in airing all the documents that show that we clearly had this torture program, and that it was endorsed by the highest levels of government, going right up to the president. And so, I can remember a lot of my time then, and we were just a very small organization of 3, maybe 4 people, was getting out into the community and organizing around those issues. We had a number of cities here in New Mexico that passed resolutions formally opposing the USA Patriot Act, precluding those cities from implementing anything similar, any sort of similar surveillance laws. So there's that work that was happening, and then there was work happening in the legislature as well. As always, we were working on the questions around efforts to try to increase sentencing for people going into prison and jail. But what really stands out in my memory is responding to this just sea change in the country as our concepts, our expectations about privacy were just being fundamentally altered by a government that was really trying to seize some authorities that it hadn't had before.
Yeah, the war on terror, thinking back on the ripple effects of that, it's terrifying to this day for me to think about. It seems to me that a lot of people conceptualize or think about civil rights and liberties in the context of the U.S. Constitution. So maybe let's start there a little bit first. How has the landscape changed nationally in the last 25 years?
Well, that's a pretty wide scope of time. I think as time has gone on, we've really seen how changes in the makeup of the federal courts have made the federal judiciary, the federal court system, a much more hostile place for civil rights cases that we typically would bring. And then also sort of in terms of legal doctrine, like the qualified immunity doctrine has made it all that more difficult for civil rights plaintiffs to get their cases heard by a jury or in a bench trial of some sort. So, as time has gone on nationally and we locally have really started to look at, well, how can we begin to find similar ways of vindicating folks' rights in the state court system under the state constitution. And of course, we here in New Mexico are extraordinarily fortunate to now have a provision in state law that allows a New Mexican to go into court, claim that the government has abused their rights under a state constitutional provision, and seek compensatory damage and actually attorney's fees in trying to vindicate their rights that way.
And no qualified immunity under the State Civil Rights Act.
Exactly.
I know that was a big sticking point.
Huge. And when you take a step back and you look at sort of the track record of qualified immunity around the country, I mean, it's just some of the cases just boggle the imagination that seemingly perfectly legitimate questions of abuse that have been brought to the court are tossed out because the particular facts don't match the facts of a previous case. So I would say that's probably been the major change for us, is seeing how the federal courts have become such a difficult place to pursue civil rights claims, either on an individual basis or on a more systemic basis, and now looking to the state courts to try to take over some of that role.
That's a good transition, actually. I've been having conversations, of course, with you and others at the ACLU for a couple of decades now. And one of the things that I've heard with more frequency in the last handful of years is that our state constitution does afford greater protections than its federal sibling, right? How should New Mexicans sort of conceptualize that notion when it comes to their civil rights and liberties?
Well, I think some of that story is still being told. With the passage of the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we're anticipating that we are going to, and are already starting to see, more and more cases being filed under state constitutional claims, and that law now being written when it has, because we haven't had that provision in state law, it hasn't been used the way it could be and shall be used now. But generally, from the language of it and in the few cases that we've been involved in, the provisions tend to be a little bit more expansive. For example, on religious liberty and religious establishment, that's come into play in some of the cases. A case that was litigated by the ACLU long before I was actually involved with the organization that struck down the constitutionality of a Bernalillo County seal that had all various kinds of religious symbolism intertwined in it. And I don't remember the details of that opinion, but in my memory, part of what that case hung on was, in fact, the very language of our state constitution. And there are other places in the state constitution where that's true as well, where the drafters of our state constitution saw what was written in the federal constitution and thought something more expansive should apply here in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, I think about some of the early police violence cases that I would have written about years ago, and learning about the Fourth Amendment analog in the state constitution and how it is significantly more expansive than what's in the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Civil Rights Act, and you're welcome to talk some more about that. I think that was quite a victory for the ACLU. What have been some of the other really big accomplishments at the New Mexico affiliate in the time that you've been there?
Yeah, well, I want to say first of all, New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we had a pretty significant hand to play in passing that legislation, but we were by no means the only actor in that. We had legislative champions like Brian Egoff who were right at the forefront of that and took some pretty heavy hits from the media and opponents of the legislation in trying to get that across the finish line. So I want to give them all the credit they do because they're due because our part in it was just a part. And that's true of all the wins that we've had over the years. Like it's always been a coalition effort. It's always been a collective effort with other allies in the community. But I think about, for example, a case that was litigated before I was actually on with the organization, NARAL v. Johnson, a case that was brought against the Johnson administration that established that here in the state of New Mexico, state Medicaid funds will be used to provide abortion care. Cases that, one of the greatest victories I think we had during the time that I've been executive director was the achieving the freedom to marry for same-sex couples in the state. A case that was brought to the state Supreme Court but was paralleled by an educational effort that EQ&M and other organizations around the state really went to the mat on and helped to shift public opinion, frankly, statewide, that I think set the stage for the court to rule the way it did. And that happened before the U.S. Supreme Court, maybe not a full year, but something less than a year before the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on a similar question. Repeal of the death penalty in 2009 was a huge victory. Again, a big coalition victory. There was a specific coalition to repeal the death penalty that led that effort. More recently, I think some of the real victories we've seen, we talked about the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, but even more recently than that, passing laws that shield people seeking reproductive health care and gender affirming care from malicious efforts to prosecute them from other states than ours, that provide certain kinds of privacy protections. Like those are significant victories. And then you can't forget that we actually had a law on the books not that long ago that would have made abortion a crime once Dobbs was ruled on and Roe was overturned. Again, through a coalition effort, we were able to get that removed from the books. And real credit to the folks in our organization, our reproductive rights lawyers in particular, as well as our other allies in knowing that was possibly a threat and that we got that taken care of before the Supreme Court ever ruled on Dobbs.
What right now do you think are the 2 or 3 biggest challenges from a civil rights and liberties perspective facing Albuquerque and New Mexico?
I've been very involved in efforts to reform the Albuquerque Police Department. Many folks may know that the Albuquerque Police Department is now sort of sunsetting its consent decree with the Department of Justice. And it is true that they've come into compliance with many of the provisions of that consent decree, and yet for all the training, for all the policy changes, for all the improvements in the way that special tactical units are deployed, we still see a pretty high rate of use of force throughout the community. And so, I think one of the sort of untold questions, one of the untold stories around civil rights for me is what does it really take to fully reform policing in this country to such a degree that people don't have to fear that if they're calling the police on behalf of one of their loved ones who's, for example, suffering mental health crisis, that they actually have to worry that they may wind up being shot or the victim of some use of force. We haven't figured that out yet, either in this state, either in this city, or nationally. I just don't think that the right mix, the right constellation of reforms has been discovered yet to transform policing adequately.
I want to ask a question about that. I don't want to ask you necessarily whether you think this 10-year project has worked. I think that's kind of a sucker question, actually. But I want to ask what you think of the tool, the process through which the federal government can come in and conduct one of these big investigations, then go force you in court to make these changes and reforms. What do you think of the tool 10 years into this? Is it aimed properly at what the problem really is?
Well, no, I think, so I have two responses to that. I think, well, the first would be, I think because we really don't know what the mix of reforms is, what the mix of transformations in policing are, that's actually going to result in a truly constitutional, truly professional, truly humane policing department, that we can leave that option off the table, that we can leave that tool off the table. That said, it also seems to me from what I've seen that it's critical that we are moving as many of those responsibilities for negotiating, for managing dangerous, criminal encounters out in the public, out of the hands of armed officers and into the hands of other professionals who are better suited to do that work and who aren't going to be armed with a gun and are going to try to solve the issue at the end of a firearm. So I think that, obviously the consent decree did not create the Albuquerque Community Safety Department. That department's had its issues, had its struggles, I understand, but it is headed in the right direction in my view. I think what we need to do fundamentally is reduce the number of encounters on the street between armed officers and the public. I think actually most officers would agree with that. I don't think they want to be in the position of being social workers and substance abuse counselors and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really important part of the mix that the consent decree obviously did not really touch. But on the other hand, you can't deny that it's been an important change in the department to upgrade all of their policies, particularly around the use of force, particularly around the requirements to have some degree of mental health training to better manage, if not perfectly manage, mental health encounters, people in mental health crisis, those kinds of situations. But so much more needs to be done. The trainings have been important from the standpoint that maybe now we have officers that actually will stop and de-escalate situations before they move up on people and make a situation where force is necessary, is unavoidable.
Officer-induced jeopardy, if you will, right?
Exactly.
The police pick a fight, end it with violence, and then call it self-defense.
Yeah, and of course the James Boyd incident was the perfect example of that, where an incident that could have been entirely avoided, where no one had to die or suffer injury because officers forced that situation to where use of force was inevitable. Someone had to die for it. And we're fortunate that in Albuquerque, I think our officers are better situated to make those kinds of decisions now than many other departments around the country, but it's not the magic solution.
Any other thoughts on big challenges before we talk some about the organization?
There are big challenges coming up. We can talk more about that because some of them are at a very large level, some of them are at our more community level. I think we as an organization try to be as strategic and use our resources just as efficiently as possible and as focused a way as possible. And it's not been one of our strategic priorities to focus on the question of homelessness and the unhoused community and how they're being treated out in the public domain. It's becoming clear to me that that's something that we're going to have to adopt in the near future, because not only are we seeing more and more efforts by state and local entities trying to essentially enforce those communities out of existence and force them to spaces outside cities and local governments, but that population is going to continue to grow, and the problem is only going to get more volatile as time goes on. So that to me is one of the huge challenges, and it gets us into questions that are far beyond the realm of just civil rights and civil liberties, right? Because now we're talking about affordable housing, now we're talking about mental health services and substance use services. So it's like all of our issues, there are root causes to the things that we oftentimes focus just on the civil rights aspect of. But really, to get at the core issue, you really do need to get to the root causes of those questions.
I have to imagine that this Grants Pass case out of Oregon that the Supreme Court just decided maybe turbocharges the organization's desire to get into that issue.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, going back to the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, we've got the great luxury in this state now of trying to continue to pursue that very case under questions that are identified by our state constitution, by a scope of rights that our state constitution has identified for all of us New Mexicans, and we don't necessarily have to be beholden to a Supreme Court that has such an extremist view of the Eighth Amendment.
I'm grateful to Peter Simonson for spending nearly 40 minutes in the studio with me. You can catch part 2 of our conversation on next week's show. Earlier this month, the New Mexico Office of Broadband and Expansion launched a statewide education network project. The $100 million program aims to connect every district in the state, and the office plans to bring broadband internet access to every public and charter school by 2027. Senior producer Lou DeVizio talked last month with Acting Director Drew Lovelace about the challenges his office has faced when working to bring a steady internet connection to classrooms across the state.
Drew Lovelace, thank you so much for joining me here on New Mexico in Focus.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah. Now, as we're sitting here today, your department is working to connect every public school in the state to high-speed internet. Can you tell me a little bit about the rollout? How many schools are without it right now as we sit here in late June having this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that high-speed internet has some definitions around it as a starting place and making sure we level set. So what we're looking to do is making sure that there's gigabit service. So the common speeds you might see in a home is maybe like 100 megabytes per second, 100 megabits per second. We're looking for gigabit, so 1,000, right, or more to the schools. So as community anchor institutions, it's really important. There's a great federal program called E-Rate that has been working on this for a lot of years, and we've actually connected all but 2 schools at this point with fiber. So fiber to the premise is one of the big goals of that E-Rate program. Those last 2 schools are using a couple of other technologies like satellite, low Earth orbit satellite, to be able to get that high-speed service up until the point that they actually get the fiber built out to the schools.
Okay, so that infrastructure, the fiber and those satellites, that's in place for every school right now?
That is correct.
Okay, so how long before they all get the internet
So
connected?
what's happening in the department is we're actually building an interconnected ring to all of the schools. So they actually can get the internet right now, but the state education network is really what the office is working on, and making sure that the schools have redundant pathways, so that way if fiber is cut somewhere along the way, that they can actually get service through another ring that goes out to a node and back out to the greater internet, a place like Albuquerque, and then on to El Paso or Denver, and one of those main ways, and then that way they have that redundant capacity in there.
Is that necessary specifically in a state like New Mexico with our geographical and geographical issues that we have here?
Yeah, so the state really has a varied terrain, and it makes connectivity not just for schools but for homes equally as difficult. So if you can think about the geography of the state, on the western side of the state we have a lot of lava rock, a lot of rock, mountainous areas in the center part of the state, and then on the eastern side kind of the plains areas, right? So as far as getting the connectivity around there are many conditions in which fiber may be cut or accidentally lost in service, and so having those redundant pathways built around is incredibly important. One of the other big elements of the state education network is making sure that the administrative burden of procuring the internet is taken off of the schools. A lot of the schools have trouble keeping IT staff, keeping procurement staff, and so an opportunity for the schools to electively or optionally join the state education network provides an opportunity for the state to take on that administrative burden for them, and their IT staff can stay focused on the devices in the schools for the kids.
Okay, this might seem like a really simple question, but why is high-speed internet so important specifically for schools?
Yeah, so, and I would say it's important for everybody, not just schools. I mean, I think if anything else, the pandemic showed us how integral the internet is into our daily lives and where technology is taking us. So, a lot of discussions happen around the Internet of Things. Our refrigerators, our stoves are now connected to the internet. We have, increasing number of devices in our pockets and our homes that are getting there, as well as in the schools. You think about the number of smart boards or extra laptops that are being administered, tests that are being taken, online for national standards or in state standards. So all of these things require the internet to be able to run and operate. And so the internet has become a necessity in our lives. And, again, I'll just broach it further than schools. It's telehealth, it's the education pieces, it's entertainment, it's government services.
Sure. Now, when you talk about this network, the redundancy to make sure that schools always have a connection, when do you anticipate that project will be completed?
Yeah, so this has been 8 years of work. So my office is about 2 years old, and so I want to just thank the Public Schools Facility Authority, which was the starting entity for this, and we've kind of taken this over in the last year and a half or so. But it has been 8 years of work to build these nodes around the state, and we're going to turn this up July 1st this year. So very exciting for us, with a lot of work from a lot of very hardworking state employees that have been working on this for a lot of years.
Okay. Now, moving away from schools specifically, which I know you touched on a bit already, but which communities have been hit the hardest by the lack of connectivity that we see here in New Mexico more than any other state?
Yeah, so it's rural communities. So I'm, from the office perspective, and we have a lot of federal funding that's going to be coming into the state over the next couple of years to make sure that rural communities get connected. But we are focused on the unserved, and there are even pockets just outside Albuquerque. So in the East Mountains, there are communities that are struggling with maybe older technology like DSL, and that might be all that they can get. And unfortunately, that's not really enough to run and operate home with all the devices that we just talked about coming online.
Sure. Why has the process of getting everyone in the state connected been so slow? I know that the Biden administration is issuing us, the state, some federal grant money. Is it just a question of money?
No, it really isn't just a question of money. The reality is that if the internet was easy to build, it would have already been built. And in a lot of ways, it was using old phone lines, copper lines, technologies like DSL. And I'm sure many of the older watchers might even think about, the old dial-up tones, right, coming from companies like AOL or other dial-up services. But, as we progress into higher and higher demands, we need to scale the technologies to go with it. So, there's multiple technologies we can get there. Most of them are backed by fiberglass, right, by fiber in the ground or fiber over aerial poles. And wireless is another option for some places where maybe it's too expensive. And then we talked a little bit about low Earth orbit satellite. So there's kind of a smattering of ways to do this. But all of that's to say that if there was a reason to have built it already, it would already be done, right? If there was an economic reason. So in a lot of the rural communities that we started to talk about just a minute ago, we have a problem where it's not economically viable for a company to operate a network. And that's where the government grants come in, making that barrier lessened for an internet service provider to come in and be able to provide that service. And that's really the big issue here. So, while Albuquerque or Santa Fe or Las Cruces are relatively well taken care of, and again, maybe a couple of spots in and around those areas that do not have some connectivity or maybe low connectivity, there are other places that just don't have any connectivity at all, especially like Navajo Nation.
Okay. So for those areas that are in these rural, it sounds like it is about money. If we're not getting the federal money or this grant money, and there's no economic benefit for companies to come through. So have we just been waiting on these federal grant dollars?
No, so some of it's going to be the federal grant dollars for those rural communities.
Okay.
But I will also add in that the process of building infrastructure takes years. Sure. Rights of way, permits are barriers, right? Getting across federal lands can be challenging. Making sure that once we actually have a line connected to a home or a line connected to a business or a school somewhere, making sure that they have devices to get on the internet, right? It's not just the connectivity issue. It's also about, is it affordable? Is there a device? Can you actually use it?
Okay. Now, 2021 census data shows that more than 90% of Americans have a broadband subscription. Here in New Mexico, we're at the bottom of the list state-wise, a little bit under 85%. What does your office consider an acceptable percentage for New Mexico for people who have access, or do you not think of it in that framing?
Yeah, I would say that some of the census data, right, goes on to older definitions from the federal government. So
Okay.
Keep in mind that broadband service or high-speed internet was considered 25 download, 3 upload during that last census, and now that's changed to 100 download, 20 upload. So, we actually think that number is probably a little bit lower, of what's been available. And what's pretty neat is we've already done a couple of state-run grant programs, and in the next 2 years, we're going to start creeping into that number. So we think in the number of households in New Mexico, and we're doing some final work on these big federal grants, right, for the broadband equity access deployment funds that are coming from the federal government. We think that number is down to in the 45,000 range.
Okay.
So 45,000 households are unserved.
Okay. To start chopping through that number, how long will it take to get that infrastructure in place that you've talked about?
Yeah, it's going to be about 5 years. So the broadband equity access deployment funds, which really are targeting the unserved as the priority, the folks who have 25/3 or less, or maybe no connectivity, they are going to be the priority out of that program, and that's who we have to go after. Now, I want to caveat this in saying that there are a couple of exemptions in this program. There are places that are so expensive to get to that it would take $1 million or $500,000 to just get to a single building. And in that, they've actually carved out a couple of ways. And so in our program, we're actually looking at how to do a bid for low Earth orbit satellite for those last locations to make sure that they do have some sort of connectivity.
Okay. Now, once all that infrastructure is in place, what's stopping a corporate provider from coming in, snatching up those networks, and taking advantage of the people who've been waiting on this service for so long?
So the way the grants are structured is actually to have them bid out. And so there will be opportunities for counties, cities, tribes, and internet service providers to be able to come in and provide that service. So they have to be able to maintain that network for the federal interest period, which is about 8 years. So that's going to be an important one. But there is nothing to say that if a company goes out of business, that another corporation may come in and buy those assets up and provide assets. What is interesting in this program is that for those who are not able to afford the internet, there is a cap and a requirement of speed that's provided, which is that 100 download, 20 upload. And for those that qualify, it would be at $50 a month for a low-cost option.
All right. Thank you so much, Drew Lovelace. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.